next story is a story from F1. Yes, we're talking a lot of cars again lately, Dr. Rod. I told you we'll get back into it and talk a lot more cars. So F1, I don't know if you saw the race on the weekend. It was United States Grand Prix, but Red Bull won again, obviously. But Lewis Hamilton actually did a great job of getting second position. It's I think it's his best position in the season. And then Charles Leclerc got position 6, and both of them were disqualified. Now, there's this crazy, really old rule that, as you can see there, let me pause this. As you can see, there's this timber board that's been put under F1 cars, and it's put there specifically to measure the wear of the board, right? That's why it's timber, so it wears away. And those little black spots are actually magnesium, I think that they are. And those are the things that give that spark of an F1 car as it's going around the track. And you see those awesome sparks that come out the back of it. They're strategically placed in there as little markers and to create the sparks for you. It's all about the experience. But there's only allowed to be a certain amount of wear on this timber after the race. And it's to prevent the cars from running too low, because these are ground effect cars. They perform better running low, and the lower they can get them, the better seal they've got to the road, the better downforce they've got, and the faster they can go. Now, F1 are trying to limit how fast the cars can go to make it safer, so they limit the height that the cars can run. And that's measured by this board. And, because obviously as suspension goes up and down and stuff like that, it hits the track and it wears away. Now, at the end of the race, everyone celebrated. Great. Lewis Hamilton gets to celebrate his podium finish in second position, only to afterwards be disqualified. So they've now... Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton have been disqualified completely. Now, you're probably wondering, what has that got to do with leadership? Well, it was a leadership decision to set up the car in a way that it would risk breaking the rules. It was a leadership decision. Now, I'm sure the drivers were included in that conversation. I'm sure the drivers aren't completely out of the conversation of car setup. But the leaders made a decision that has now cost them to lose all their results. They just deleted from the race pretty much. Because they're trying to run to the edge of performance. Dr. Rod, not all of us are managing multi-$100 million F1 teams and making the types of decisions they are. But we in business are always making decisions about pushing the boundaries of performance that could be breaking rules, affecting our clients, getting some negative backlash or whatever. How do we make that decision? Because we as leaders do need to continue to push boundaries, but how do we make that decision of pushing the boundaries but not pushing it too far?
Well, when I looked at this, I thought, I love this. This is a fabulous case study in risk management. So you identify risks, and then you decide whether those risks can be reduced and what kind of policies you would put in place or actions you would take to reduce the risk. And you also have to make decisions about how you're going to manage the outcomes of risk if you can't reduce them, or if you can't reduce those risks below some acceptable level.
Yep.
So I looked at this and thought, wow, these guys are making very fine-tuned decisions here. And the lower they make the car, the greater the risk it is that they are taking. And it's a risk, one, they need to be aware of, so they need to identify it. They need to be able to assess what the outcomes might be should the risk event actually happen. And they need to make decisions about how they might mitigate the risk, or if they can't mitigate it, how they might deal with the effects of that risk. Now, I can't tell from the video that we watched whether or not that process was one that was undertaken by the decision makers, but that's basically what they should do. And look, I think it's really quite fascinating to have a look at how things like the nature of the track, they talked about the undulations in the track in Japan, and how obviously because of the way that suspensions work, if you've got a bumpy track, that's actually going to cause the car itself to move up and down, and that'll cause some wear on that board. I thought it was really fascinating. And, I think the decision makers are probably sophisticated enough to make some analysis of risk. And that's what we should all be doing as leaders in business or in the church. There are so many decisions we make to which there is risk attached. We need to identify that risk. We need to make some assessment as to whether or not we can reduce or eliminate the risk altogether. If it can't be reduced or eliminated, we need to know how we're going to manage the outcomes. And I was fascinated by the whole thing and all the technology involved. And look, it was great. And you know what? It just turned. I think it was 4 cars turned out after they were tested. They turned out to have scrimped a little bit too much off those boards, and as a result, they were disqualified.
Yeah,
we can't say it was an accident, but I think we can say it was just the outworking of risk that the decision makers took either knowingly or unknowingly.
Risk management. Now, you're on point. When we talk about risk, a lot of people just generally think about workplace health and safety and like risk of falls and risk of electrocution and risk of slips and all those sorts of things, which is one thing. There's obviously, especially in Australia, there is a lot of legislation around workplace health and safety. Whenever I've run my events, I do my own risk assessments of the workplace health and safety stuff. I create my own forms and all those sorts of things. So we do all that very easily, very strategically, and very documented from a point of like workplace health and safety. How can we carry that kind of level of detail and level of structure, or is it worthwhile doing that to something else that is a decision that has risk, not necessarily, a workplace injury, but...
Oh, absolutely, because most decisions that you make at board level or at senior management level, be that in a profit-oriented organisation, a not-for-profit, or a church or anything like that, they will have consequences on both sides of your profit and loss account, on revenue and potentially costs as well. So... and that's going to hold whether or not you're a for-profit business, a not-for-profit organisation, a church, or whatever you happen to be. Mm-hmm. And so I think, and look, even in decisions we make as individuals, should I overtake the vehicle in front of me?
Yes.
There are risks associated with that.
Yeah.
There are more risks if you don't have visibility, 400 or 500 metres ahead. And here in Australia, we have what we call road trains. And there are certain highways on which road trains can travel at 110 kilometres per hour. To overtake one of those safely, you need to be able to see about 2 kilometres ahead of you. Mm-hmm. So if you can't, then you're taking a risk.
Yep.
And I don't know whether many of us actually know that or take much notice of it, but...
consciously aware of it.
There are lots and lots of decisions that we make which... impose some kind of risk on us, and that certainly happens in organisations. I think we need to be as aware as we possibly can be of risk. Yep. We need to analyse the risk, look at its sources. Is there anything we can do to remove that risk altogether or to reduce it? If we can't remove it or reduce it, what can we do to mitigate the effects of that risk, whatever it happens to be? And there's a lot of risks that aren't risks associated with life and limb. There's a lot of risks associated with our revenue, with our costs as well. So we should always be conscious of risk. And it's very difficult to attach a mathematical probability to risk as well, mainly because we don't have enough events on which to base some kind of mathematical, statistical probability. You've got to use a lot of judgment, a lot of wisdom. You've got to draw on the experience of others. Absolutely. 'Cause intuition is a very real thing because intuition draws so much on your own knowledge and your experience, and obviously the experience of others if you've been talking to others and reading the literature and so on. That's what, a good university education will expose you to a very broad range of literature. I don't think that happens very often these days, but that's what should happen.
Especially not after what we were talking about before the podcast.
Yeah.
Dr. Rod still teaches at some universities and higher education institutions, and we were just discussing the challenges now of ChatGPT created assignments and stuff like that. So people aren't actually studying the research and
listen, if you're a student and you're thinking about cheating on an assessment, you need to weigh up the risk.
Yeah.
The risk of getting caught, and then the penalties that might be applied. And I tell you what, there are a few lecturers around who are pretty wise because they've been at it for a long, long time.
You've been doing it for 1 or 2 years, haven't you, Dr. Rod?
I've been doing it for 45 years, mate.
You've been doing it for longer than I'm alive.
Oh, dear me.
That's awesome. So one thing you've actually mentioned about the risk is minimizing the risk, but also being aware of what the consequences are or what the fallout or whatever. Obviously now these guys have had the teams as well have had their race literally deleted from history.
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
So how do we then I'm sure an F1 team does risk management. I'm sure they've done all their calculations. They knew it. How do you now manage this? Like now there's a fallout, there's consequences, things are bad, right? Someone's hurt, someone's hurt physically, someone's hurt emotionally, someone loses income, you lose clients, whatever. Okay, there's a fallout. Now what do we do? We decided to take that risk. What do we do?
Oh, you learn from it. I think you learn from it. Look, I'm not an expert, of course, as you well know. If you have a look at the type of vehicles I've owned and drive, you'll know that I'm not in the same league as you are. I think one of the things, the lessons they might learn is to know the track really, really well. I think one of the issues here was they didn't have enough time for practice.
Yeah.
So they may not have been able to get enough knowledge of the track in the first place. But I would say in order to deal with the risk of being disqualified in the next race, find out much, much more about the track. Yep. Because that's one of the major determinants of how much wear and tear there is on those boards. Yeah. What do they call it? They call it the plank, don't they?
The plank, yeah, I think it's called the plank. Yeah. So one thing I would like to add to that about the consequences is I think we need to take ownership. I think that's the thing, and we're kind of alluded to that a little bit in the Adidas story with Kanye that we're talking about. Like, we just need to take responsibility in the situation. Yep, I'm the leader. We assessed all the risks. This was the decision we made. We got caught out, and we got caught to the 1% of what the risk. The 1% of thing that we thought was going to happen did happen. It was my decision. I'm not going to point blame. I'm not going to start accusing other people or whatever, because I think that's one thing that, like, I haven't actually seen the actual responses, direct responses, but there was kind of a lot of general, feedback of, there was a lot of excuses of the tracks or the I think that the nicknames for them is like sausages or something like that, which is the curbing of the road, they run over it a little bit too much or whatever. Like, they just started pointing to it was that, rather than just going, you know what, we did calculations, we assessed the risk, this was the decision we made, we cut a little bit fine, and and now we've got some consequences, and that's it. So,
Yeah, I think Lewis Hamilton, he did say we've learned a lot.
yeah,
And so he wasn't really trying to blame anybody as the driver. And I think, a lot of these rules are not just safety rules either, are they? They're rules about design so that the winner is the most skillful driver.
yeah.
Isn't that correct?
Well,
So,
not in F1. Yeah, yes, a little bit. Like they are trying to limit some of the things, but there is a lot of it that is. That's why it's a team sport, because it's like who can put together the best team, but within the parameters. Because as soon as you go out of the parameters, you're now. It's performance.
So parameters are
enhancing
about
drugs,
creating what we call in other areas a level playing field, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think Hamilton's attitude was the right attitude in this case.
Yeah.
We learned a lot, and that's the way you deal with risk. If there's an event, learn from the event so that you don't make the same mistake next time. Because this wasn't really an issue of cheating. I don't think this was an issue of fine tuning the vehicle and making a whole lot of decisions about the performance of the vehicle without perhaps having enough knowledge of the track itself. And so my guess is one of the lessons they've learned is we've got to do better at knowing the track.
Yeah, that's good. So as a leader facing risks, do better. That's it. Know the track. Look,
listen, at the bottom of every risk report, there should be a little question that says, what have we learned?
What have we learned? That's good.
What have we learned?
Risk assessment. That's all it comes down to. Knowing your risks, and if you happen to overstep the mark and make a mistake, own up to it, learn from it, and take responsibility. I think that's the key, because we do have to make some hard decisions as leaders sometimes, and sometimes those things don't go our way, and we just need to own up to it and learn our lesson. That's really good. Hey, you just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership Podcast. If you like that, hit the like button and put a comment below. Hey, if you want to watch more videos like this, check out our channel, and while you're there, make sure you subscribe.